Shalom guys, welcome back to another episode here at Yashav You Ministries, Casa Israel Yarah. Today we're going to do a small study or read through to the book of Maccabees, right? First Maccabees chapter 1, and we're going to understand a little bit of the history of the Maccabees and why we celebrate Hanukkah. So I hope you enjoy the reading, and let's get started. First Maccabees chapter 1. After Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came from the land of Kittim, had defeated King Darius, the Persian, and the Medes. He succeeded him as king. He had previously become king of Greece. He fought many battles, conquered strongholds, and put to death the kings of the earth. He advanced to the ends of the earth and plundered many nations. When the earth became quiet before him, he was exalted. His heart was lifted up. He gathered a very strong army and ruled over countries, nations, and princes. They became tributary to him. After he fell sick and perceived that he was dying, he summoned his most honored officers who had been brought up with him from youth. He divided his kingdom among them while he was still alive. And after Alexander had reigned 12 years, he died. Then his officers began to rule, each in his own place. They all put on crowns after his death, and so did their descendants. After them many years, they cursed, and they caused many evils on earth. From them came forth sinful roots. Antiochus Epiphanes, son of King Antiochus, he had been in hostage in Rome. He began to reign in 137 years of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days, certain renegades came out from Israel and missold many sayings, "Let us go and make covenant with Gentiles around us, for since we separated from them, many disasters have come upon us." This proposal pleased them, and some of the people eagerly went to the king, who authorized them to observe the ordinance of the Gentiles. So they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the Gentile custom and removed the marks of circumcision and abandoned the holy covenant. They joined with the Gentiles and sold themselves to do evil. So we're seeing here that in the story of the Maccabees, there was a change of mindset in the history, right? And so Epiphanes was creating this mindset of exalting themselves over Elohim, right? And they were more interested in pursuing what the Gentiles wanted, right? They were reversing their circumcision that becomes the mark of the covenant, and they were refusing Elohim's laws, right? And Elohim's covenant and promises that were given to Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob, right? And so here we're starting to see a little bit of what was going on in the Maccabees and in the Maccabees time, right? And what caused the revolt. When Antiochus saw the kingdom was established, he determined to become king of the land of Egypt in order that he might reign over both kingdoms. So he invaded Egypt with a strong force, with chariots and elephants and cavalry, with a large fleet. He engaged King Ptolemy of Egypt in battle, and Ptolemy turned and fled before him, and many were wounded and fell. They captured the fortified cities in the land of Egypt, and he plundered the land of Egypt. After subduing Egypt, Antiochus returned in 143rd year, and he went up against Israel and came to Jerusalem with a strong force. He erringly entered the sanctuary, took the golden altar, the lampstands for the light, and all the utensils, and he took also the table of the bread and the presents, the cups and drinks offering, the bowls of golden censers, the curtains, the crowns, and the gold desecrating on the front of the temple. He stripped it of all. He took the silver and the gold, and the costly vessels. He took also the hidden treasures that he found. Taking them all, he went into his own land. He shed much blood and spoke with great arrogance. Israel mourned deeply in every community. Rulers and elders groaned. Young women and young men became faint. The beauty of the woman faded. Every bridegroom took up the lament. She who has sat in the bridal chamber was mourning. Even the land trembled for its inhabitants, and all the house of Jacob was clothed with shame. 2 years later, the king sent to the cities of Judah and chief collectors of tribute. He came to Jerusalem with a large force of deceitful, and he spoke peacefully words to them, and they believed him. But suddenly he fell upon the city, dealt its severe blow, and destroyed many people of Israel. He plundered the city, burned it with fire, and tore down the houses and its surrounding walls. They took captive the women and children and seized the livestock. Then they fortified the city of David with a great strong wall, strong towers, and it became their citadel. They stationed there a sinful people, men who were renegades. These strengthened their position. They stored up arms and food, and collecting the spoils of Jerusalem, they stored them there and became great menace. For their citadel became an ambush against the sanctuary and evil adversaries of Israel at all times. On every side of the sanctuary they shed innocent blood. They even defiled the sanctuary. Because of them, the residents of Jerusalem fled. She became a dwelling of strangers. She became strange to her offspring, and her children forsake her. Her sanctuary became desolated like a desert. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Shabbats into reproach, and her honor into contempt. Her dishonor now grew as great as her glory, and her exaltation was turned into mourning. Then the king wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and that all should give up their particular customs. All the Gentiles accepted the command of the king. Many from Israel gladly adopted his religion. They sacrificed to the idols, profaned the Sabbath. The king sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and the towns of Judah. He directed them to follow customs strange to the land, to forbid burnt offerings, sacrifices, drink offerings in the sanctuary, to profane the Sabbath and the festivals, to defile the sanctuary and the priests, to build altars and sacred precincts and shrines for idols, to sacrifice swine and other unclean animals, and to leave their sons, that they would forget the law and change all the ordinances he had added. And whoever does not obey the command of the king shall die. In such words he wrote this whole kingdom. He appointed inspectors all the people, and commanded the towns of Judah to offer sacrifice town by town. Many of the people, everyone who forsook the law, joined them, and they did evil in the land. They drove Israel into hiding in every place and refuge that they had. Now on the 15th day of Kislev, in the 145th year, they erected a desolating sacrilege in the altar of the burnt offering. They also built altars in the surrounding town of Judah, and offer incense at the doors of the house and the streets. The book of the law that they found, they tore the pieces and burned it with fire. Anyone found possessing the book of the covenant, or anyone who would whore the law or adhere the law, was commanded to death by decree of the king. They kept using violence against Israel and against those who were found month after month in the towns. On the 20th day of the month, they offered sacrifice on the altar that was on the top of the altar of burnt offering. According to the decree, they put to death the women who had their children circumcised, and their families those who circumcised them, and they hung the infants from their mothers' necks. But many in the Israel stood firm and were resolved in their hearts not to eat unclean food, and they chose to die rather than to be defiled by food or to profane the holy covenant, and they did die. Very great wrath came upon Israel. So, we see here in chapter 1 in the history of the Maccabees, the great dishonor that was brought to Elohim's land, Elohim's kingdom, Elohim's temple, right? We see how many people gave away the Torah and gave away the ordinances, and they decided to dishonor the Sabbaths and the feasts, right, and the sacrifices, right? And many of them chose to die for those that believed that Elohim's honor was worth dying for. So, after reading the first chapter of the Maccabees, I ask you, where do you stand? Do you stand with those that in oppression give in to the world, or do you stand with those that are willing to honor Elohim even till death? Thank you for watching. Shalom.